NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg has met with world leaders in Munich. Stoltenberg says Russia has, quote, relentlessly massed troops in and around Ukraine in the biggest military buildup since the Cold War. Let's go live now to White House correspondent for the Washington Examiner, Christian Datoc. Always great to see you, Christian.
Great to be back with you, Jenny.
So, yes, the talks in Munich, we're hearing the world leaders are still saying that an attack is imminent. How possible is a diplomatic solution looking?
Well, President Biden spoke to this yesterday at the White House, Janie, and I think if you were to ask most of the military officials, defense experts here in the U.S., I think they would say that a diplomatic option is no longer on the table. President Biden said that President Putin has definitely made up his mind about an invasion, and it should come any day now. That being said, Secretary of State Antony Blinken, Foreign Minister Lavrov on the Russian side, they're going to be meeting in Europe next week. It's strange to schedule a meeting ahead of a potential invasion, but again, we know that Russia likes to obfuscate their moves. They like to sow confusion. We've seen a number of false flag operations they've been trumpeting in recent days as sort of a smokescreen to cover a potential invasion. So this might be more cat and mouse antics from Putin. But again, if you ask President Biden, he wants to solve this diplomatically, and he has not taken that idea off the table. But again, every day that passes, each batch of new troops that Russia moves towards the border, it's looking like that is less and less of a possible outcome.
So what has been shown? We've had reports of nuclear ballistic missiles testing in Russia, which has occurred. Also shelling, which has certainly increased, certainly after about 2 months of being fairly quiet. We've had 2 Ukrainian soldiers killed, 4 injured in the shelling on Saturday. What is this showing us?
This is showing us that Russia is serious. And I think President Putin presiding over these nuclear drills is not necessarily a sign that they will use tactical nuclear weapons in any invasion of Ukraine. But this is just, again, a show of force. This is showing the world and NATO specifically, we've got the big guns. We're not afraid to use them. Now, as far as the shelling goes, I think this is part of one of those, again, false flag type operations, a false pretext. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki called it earlier this week, that they can try and sow discord. And of course, we know that they are coordinating with the Ukrainian separatists operating in the eastern part of the country, trying to move people out of the country. They've been pushed, some of the Ukrainians, towards Russia. Of course, some are evacuating westward, closer to Kyiv, and then, of course, closer to Poland. But as far as the shelling goes, this has been a constant at the border this entire year for the past 2 months. It's not just shelling, it's ongoing cyber attacks from Russian intelligence. And just yesterday, the White House formally accused Russian intelligence of carrying these attacks out. And this is an escalation in the rhetoric from Washington. They often talk about how these Russian actors are behind some of the cyber attacks. They haven't ever officially accused the Russian government, at least in my memory, of carrying these attacks out. So again, this is sort of posturing on both sides, and hopefully this doesn't devolve into a full-fledged invasion, although it is looking like that's going to be more of a possibility every day.
We also heard from Kamala Harris recently. She talks about Russia's actions don't match their words. And if Russia further invades Ukraine, the US and allies are going to impose significant and unprecedented economic costs. A strong statement by Kamala Harris.
It is. And this is probably the most important foreign policy trip of Vice President Harris's entire political career. She's, of course, over at the Munich Security Conference, where she met with all of the NATO leaders and Ukrainian President Zelensky just earlier today, actually. And look, I think there's no messing about when it comes to this statement. The U.S. and its allies, they will cripple Russia's economy. And even with, a little bit of a boost from China or some of these other nations, perhaps Iran, who don't like to play ball with the West, Russia can't handle these type of economic sanctions. There's already, during the last 10 years or so, been widespread, a widening income gap and wealth gap among the Russian citizens. So this is not something that Russia can necessarily deal with. And I think perhaps the largest economic blow would be the halting of the Nord Stream 2 natural gas pipeline. Of course, Germany really wanted that to come through. They get about a third of their natural gas imports from Russia, and the Nord Stream 2 pipeline would have been a huge boost to them. That being said, the U.S., even some Arab Gulf nations have promised to up their energy commitments to Germany, to the rest of the NATO nations, should these sanctions go in place. I don't think that this will be a zero-sum game as far as an economic blowback on the West, but let's be honest, I don't think Vladimir Putin is dancing around the idea that his people will just sit back and allow the rest of the world to cut them off economically just to move on a small part of land in Ukraine right now.
And you also mentioned before about people being evacuated and moving to places like Poland. Tell us about the potential humanitarian crisis.
Well, we're already seeing it with the shelling. There has been some collateral damage, and of course, Russian forces shelled a kindergarten just 2 days ago, which thankfully there were no students or teachers or staff there at the time. But there are, millions of people in Ukraine. This has massive humanitarian implications, really. And, thankfully, Poland and the other NATO countries are already taking in some of these refugees. But there's no way to know how this will impact the EU specifically. There's no potential plan for resettling these people in the specific country. Hopefully, again, there are still fingers crossed that this doesn't end up in a full invasion, in a full war, and those people can go back to Ukraine. But Russia did this just 5-6 years ago, or I guess 7 years ago at this point in time, back in 2014, 2015. They moved into Crimea. There was a massive exodus of people from the region, and the region is still feeling the economic impacts of those lost jobs, the infrastructure damage from the military rolling through, the Russian military rolling through. So this is a dovetailing effect, and it's just too early to say right now, Janie, what this means in terms of the humanitarian crisis that could potentially be on the horizon.
All right, well, we appreciate you always coming on to Sky News, and thank you very much, White House correspondent for the Washington Examiner, Christian Datoc. We'll talk to you again soon. Thank you.